conversation today, my guest has been described as perhaps the greatest Bharatanatyam dancer of all time. A multifaceted personality, with her dance group, Darpana, she has done pioneering work in using the classical dance forms to promote and talk about social issues. I'm delighted to welcome Mrinalini Sarabhai. Welcome. You started your dance career in the 30s, and it has, in some ways, you paralleled, you had a ringside view of Indian history, the struggle for freedom. It's the 50th anniversary of India's independence, and what are your feelings at this time?
Well, we were all very much connected with the movement. I wasn't actually one of them, but the whole family was, the Swaminathan family, my mother's family, and also the Sarabhai family, with many of them going to jail. And there was such a wonderful feeling of expectation, of courage, and real freedom. And I think we were all so enthused, even as youngsters, carrying flags. And I met Gandhiji when I was very young, and his personality, Panditji. And we had in the parliament at that time some lovely people who really did know what independence was and had great ideals. And they themselves were people of great maturity. And I think this feeling really lasted us for some time. Now I'm a little disillusioned about what is happening today. I think we all are. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't still go forward, because there are lots and lots of wonderful people in India still who believe in real freedom.
When you started your career in the 30s, it was still unusual for women to go into the performing arts.
Yes, it was, but fortunately in the 30s there was Rukmini Devi, Arundale, and when she started, she really broke the barrier for us in the south. My difficulty was in the 40s. After I got married and came to Gujarat, I found what she had found in South India, I found in Gujarat, because they didn't think of dancing at all. There was no dance tradition except folk tradition. And then to have a person of our family, is called so-called respectable family, dancing was quite a shock, I think. But what I did was, and I had complete support from Vikram and his entire family, they are very artistic, I just went on dancing. And I gave as many shows as possible, and people started to come first out of curiosity, something to talk about, and then younger children began to enjoy it and say it's wonderful. And the classicism especially, I did mainly Bharatanatyam at that time, and I think this fascinated them. And then slowly, it took about 10, 11 years, but I broke the barriers. And today it's like that, and that's very nice.
You've had a long association. Well, you trained at Kalakshetra, and it's a tradition that has continued. How important was that training for you at that time, and working with Rukmini Arundale?
Well, I never really worked with her directly. I worked with the guru who was there, who was Muthukumaran Pillai. And Rukmini, you see, knew my mother very well, and so she treated me as a young daughter, I should say. And so I worked with the guru. And then the guru started coming to my house and stayed with me. So for many years I had the guru staying, and when I started my academy in Ahmedabad, he came there. And so I went on with my practice. And in between, I went to Tagore's Shantiniketan.
What prompted you to go into the public domain of dancing?
Well, dancing is my breath. And I've never thought differently, because when I was born, when I was about 3, I knew I was a dancer. And I believe that the past life is there. I'm a great believer in it, because otherwise, when I look at my life and destiny and where it has taken me, I feel each one of us has a purpose in life, that the pattern is already there. The design you give it is your freedom. But the the river, as I say, is the same. And so I knew I was a dancer. I never thought of anything else.
What is it when you say the purpose of your life was to be a dancer? What was the purpose of dance then for you?
Nothing, just dance, just movement. But I knew that I had to express myself in movement. And I was also good at sports, which you could say was also movement. But the dance was what, and I had not seen any dancing. I didn't know what dance was in India, nor did my family. So I had to, it was such a strong feeling within that I went out to seek my gurus. And I always had to find them myself, but I always felt guided. I know this doesn't sound rational, but it's true.
You traveled a great deal when you were young too, and then you spent time in Indonesia, and you almost went to Oxford. When did this sort of, the elements of the Indianness of the dance assert itself for you? Did you feel an affinity for a particular form?
No, well, I really only saw Bharatanatyam, and I had not seen any other dancing, even though I belong to Kerala, at least my ancestral home is in Kerala, but I only saw Bharatanatyam, so Bharatanatyam became...
How old were you then?
I must have been about 8 or 9 when I saw some performances of Bharatanatyam, and I liked it, and I felt this. But for a long time I didn't find a teacher. I did go to other teachers, and I did whatever. I just kept moving, I should say. It wasn't Bharatanatyam, it wasn't any artam for that matter, but it was a kind of pattern of dance. But it never stopped till I got to real Bharatanatyam. And when I traveled, it was, of course, after Shantiniketan that I went to school abroad, and there I did ballet. And then I went to Shantiniketan where there was Manipuri, but I did my Bharatanatyam practice while I was in Shantiniketan, but I also acquainted myself with Manipuri and with Kathakali, strangely enough, in Shantiniketan.
You know, the Indian dance traditions are very disciplined and very structured, as opposed to many of the sort of modern Western dance forms, which are much more sort of flowing and spontaneous. Have you felt that if this wellspring of inspiration was to express yourself in movement, have you felt this discipline constrictive in any way?
Not constrictive, no, I wouldn't say that. But in the beginning, you see, I feel technique is very, very important. Because even in ballet, the strict ballet is very, very strict and confined. And like Bharatanatyam is confined. But after studying the technique and establishing myself as a Bharatanatyam dancer, then I felt I could take liberty with it. And I did. In Shantiniketan, Gurudev Tagore himself asked me to do some new movements and so on, and I did. But as I say, I felt that the technique has to be studied very seriously before you can experiment. And I only experimented after that. But I always wanted to experiment and tell of experiences or social life.
Mrinalini, there is a great deal of interest now in the relationship between the internal processes of the mind and the external body. And dance is expressing those complex internal emotions in physical form. How important are the internal processes for a dancer?
I think most important, apart from the technique which you study, after you study the techniques, it has to be something so eternal. And I think this is the difference between dancer and dancer. The audience, strangely enough, immediately recognizes this quality. And that is why even when I have been in Europe and all over the world, it was not the technique. Of course, the technique was beautiful, as they said, and I know I did the technique well and I had studied it. But it was that inner self that touched them, I think. And it is this inner self that has to project in some unseen way and connect with the person you're talking to or the audience. Now, how that happens is because there is, once you go deep into art, you are there all the time. You don't go out of it. It's like a constant meditation. So even if whatever your hand does, It goes from here, from your mind, from your intellect, from your heart. I don't know if
No.
this is...
Would you say that the converse was true too, that when you follow through certain gestures and
Yes.
movements that it impacts the mind?
Of course. I mean, if I stretch out my hand, it's not just the hand that is going. It has to be me that follows and stretches my hand to you. If I don't have that emotion, I just stretch a hand like this. Okay, it's a hand. If I stretch it out and I'm saying it is to you I stretch my hand, then the hand has that energy that goes out to you. If I detach my hand from my mind and from my inner spirit, it has no meaning, it's just a hand.
Would you say then that a good artist needs to be perhaps a good human being too? There must be integrity and purity for communication to take place?
That's a very difficult question, because sometimes they may not be good human beings, but at the moment of art, they are. Like Van Gogh, for instance. Recently I read a woman who had met Van Gogh, and she said he was an awful ruffian, very rude all the time. But when his hand, or when he saw the flowers and when he saw the fields of yellow and the saffron, there must have been something within him that moved him. And for that moment, he was divine.
To what extent then is art purely dancing, a purely personal process? I mean, there is an audience and you're interacting with that, but what about the larger social responsibility or context for art? Your group has done a lot of work in this area, but what has been the impulse, the impetus for that?
You see, I think it has to be something, again, that you feel. In the 60s, I broke away for the first time in Bharatanatyam technique, keeping the technique, but I talked about dowry debts. In the 60s, this was before everybody thought about it a lot, but something hit me, I read about it, and it hit me, and I thought, my expression is Bharatanatyam. Let me somehow, with a group of 3, that's all. They acted both as the girl and the in-laws and her friends. You know, it was only a group of 3, but because it was so strong within me again. And I think this is where the difference is, that if you do something just for effect, it does come out as something wrong. But if you do it because your impulse is so strong, like, for instance, my own daughter, Malika, feels so strongly about violence, but she feels even stronger than I do about violence, though I'm brought up with Gandhiji's ideas. But then it comes out in whatever is your medium. If you're a writer or a speaker, it comes out in that medium.
But do you feel that in some ways, or do you come up against discomfiture on the part of purists perhaps, that this is in some ways diluting a pure tradition of thousands of years?
Strangely enough, I didn't. People accepted me because I already had established myself as a very strict Bharatanatyam dancer. So what I often did in my programs, and I did the same with Kathakali, which I also studied, was to always start my program with a very, very strong Bharatanatyam piece or a Kathakali piece, whichever I was going to do. So there was the establishment of my training. And then I would tell the audience, with this training, I now want to talk about something that touches me. And so they accepted it. They accepted this piece on dowry debts very well, and I was surprised at the reaction everywhere. So I never had that kind of criticism, because I proved that I was a classical dancer.
You talked about how you sort of very early on intuited that your life had a purpose, which was to dance. You have a daughter who also dances and does other things. When did you intuit that this may have been a part of her purpose? Did you have an aspiration for her?
No, I had no aspiration, because Vikram and I believed in our children's complete freedom, and Malika was not born with that feeling for dance, because she saw a side of me that for her as a child was not very good, going away for long periods, seeing how tired and exhausted I used to be. But I think a great sorrow in our life, the tragedy that happened to us, suddenly she found solace in dance. She had always danced very well, but not from within. She danced because she was a good dancer and she learned at my... It was at that time that she suddenly realized, I think, that she wanted to dance, and that was her expression.
What impact did passing away of your husband have on you? Very often for people, the loss of someone very close to them, a parent, a husband, a guru sometimes, is almost a cataclysmic moment, a transforming experience, a process which then changes or modifies the direction of their lives. In what ways do you feel it may have impacted you?
It impacted me that it stunned me for about 2 years. I could hardly face up, but I have to say Mallika's and my son Kartikeya's support was tremendous. They were also quite young, not that young, but quite young still. He was in college, she was still young, but I think their support, this is where I think children are so important, that it was really Mallika who made me face up and dance again, and I danced with her in the beginning, so that we both had done togetherness. And with my son it was the same, that he just took on the role of being very, very supportive. But it was difficult, very difficult.
You were sort of amongst the first high-profile, highly visible, two-career couple. Was that sort of unusual and difficult to handle and come to terms with at that time?
Yes, it was. Because I think, first of all, the feeling against dance, and that after I was married, why should you dance? I never understand why should you dance, you know? You don't have to. And there was a lot of opposition because, in a way, of our social position. And people had this funny notion that if you were married into a so-called fine family or whatever they were, that dancing comes very easily. I never understood that, because I still used to practice 15 hours a day almost, you know, in between and everything like that. Then it became 8 hours, then now about 5 hours. But practice is practice. And Vikram understood this very well because he was constantly in the lab. So my children were also brought up like that. So it was something so natural, but there was a lot of opposition, strange opposition. Very strange.
Vikram Sarabhai is a legend in his own right, as you are, a living legend perhaps. And the Sarabhai family is very well known. And this is an incredible legacy that you carry with you. Is it sometimes a hindrance, perhaps?
Well, I'm very proud of our legacy. I'm a very small cog in it, I feel, because most of them are political. As you know, my mother was one of the first signers of the Constitution, Mrs. Swaminathan. My sister is Captain Lakshmi of the INA. My sister-in-law Mridula, and the whole family, as you say. So I felt very, I think, proud to be part of both these families. I was very proud of my sister fighting in Singapore, of my mother in Parliament, and her closeness, of Mridula Ben, who was one of the bravest women I have ever known, especially during the partition. So I felt it's a great heritage. But as I say, I believe so much in destiny. And I take it as a blessing. We come into this world for some purpose. We don't know why. And we should serve that purpose. I think this is our responsibility, that whatever we do in life, however small or however big, we have to do it with complete dedication, whatever it is, whether it is just friendship even. And I think people, often young people today, don't realize that, as we did. And yet, there are a lot of young people who do take responsibility for their living.
Do you sometimes feel this sense of despair that here was a family of enormous sacrifice and service to the nation, and today, 50 years later, your daughter performed on the 50th anniversary of India's independence before 5 prime ministers, former prime ministers, and there is a sense of despair and frustration at what is happening to India. Do you sometimes sort of clasp your hands in despair?
Yes, sometimes, but I have a great faith in this country and a great faith in its people, because the people I meet, and they're not the people we're talking about, they are very sincere. And I have seen so many pockets in India where people are helping socially and in small lives, helping others, helping poverty, helping tribals. My own daughter is helping in tribals in the schools. We have a big program called Darpana for Development, which she has started. So even our dancers are now working with handicapped children, working in tribal areas, and working with all the schools in Ahmedabad. So you see, there are these young people. She has a whole group of very young people. They are all working, and when I see them dancing with handicapped children and people, I know India will survive.
Tell us a little bit about your husband. How did you meet him, and what sort of attracted you?
You must wait for my autobiography or nobody will buy it. No, he was a student in Bangalore at Sir C.V. Raman's. And I was in Bangalore just then from Shantiniketan dancing with Ram Gopal. I was just beginning to have a career of dance. And so we met like that because he was very interested in a workers' theatre. He wanted a theatre for workers in the Institute of Science. So he came to us. Of course, the families knew each other because both the mothers were in women's conferences and so on. But we knew them as a family, not very well. So we met in Bangalore.
Was it love at first sight?
No. It was love at a lot of second sight, because he was in his career, I was in my career. I was a career girl and he was very much a career person too. Career meaning physics and, cosmic rays at that time. So that is what I think we cemented our friendship on, that we would never get married.
Well, here was someone working and sort of looking at least professionally, the empirical material world, and here was someone else who was sort of looking at the intuitive, the expression of emotions. What was the meeting ground?
You're wrong, Scientists are always looking at the intuitive world. That is how science says, and dancers are too. So we're both really looking at space, at outer space. And I think this is the great meeting ground, that I could understand his vision and he could understand mine. Because we were both looking far beyond. Apart from having our feet very firmly on the ground of India, we were looking beyond. Both of us, seeking. I think seeking is very important.
We go back to the idea of purpose of life. You've been dancing for more than 50 years. What purpose do you see in the remaining years of your life?
I don't know. I hope I can always dance. I keep dancing. I don't do so many regular performances now, but I do certain of my own choreography. I often write poetry and then dance that poetry. I've just done one on shadows, which I call The Shadows of Life. And I wrote the poem and then I danced it as I wish to dance it. So, writing and dancing.
And as we await your autobiography, what would you like us to think of you having read the autobiography?
I hope as a human being who had value for life, value for friendship, and a great love for humanity and existence. I hope, like when you see a flower and you remember its color and its fragrance long after it is faded, but there's a moment when you see its beauty and its color and something touches you and you pass by, but the flower is always in your heart.
Mrinalini, thank you very much. It's been a great privilege and an honor. Thank you.